Hello, it's time for another Summit Racing Performance Parts Expo video. During this video series, we've been sitting down with some of the automotive performance industry's most well-known manufacturers, to kind of see what they've been up to for the past year, what we'll likely see on their R&D horizon, etc. And today we're talking with Mr. Clutch, Will Baty from McLeod Racing. Look at that. Now, most racers, particularly drag racers, are probably familiar with McLeod. The company is very well known for its high-performance clutches, bell housings, and driveline stuff like that. But McLeod's also serving the off-road community as well with trail-tested products. In fact, from what I've heard, McLeod's got some cool stuff to talk about, specifically a new adventure series, internal hydraulic slave bearing, that'll withstand all that mud, sand, and gunk an off-roader will throw at it. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Will. What do you want to tell us about?
Well, yeah, I mean, my history is obviously in the Jeep world as well, in the off-road. And I also have a 2017 Jeep JK that had that bearing noise, and I hated it. It really didn't hurt anything, but it just annoying, especially if you were, driving in it on the streets and you pull up to a drive-through. Anytime you got two walls, that noise is really amplified, and you start hearing this. Like, what is that noise? And you barely touch the pedal itself, the clutch pedal, and that noise would go away. And so further development, when we pulled the clutch down, I found out what that problem was. And internally, the way the Jeep JK is made, it's a lot of things are thin and plastic, so they wear out really, really relatively fast. And the other problem is the throwout bearing's got two clips that clip into the clutch fork itself, and it's really difficult to put that fork on. And so what you end up doing is hyperextending the springs, and now that bearing is loose on the fork. So now you have a sort of rattle, so to speak. And if the pressure plate diaphragm fingers aren't level, it creates this bouncing, and that's another noise that can happen. So when you don't have everything nice, new and fresh and under perfect tension, then you create this rattle, and that's what can happen. So what we ended up doing was designing this internal bearing. And it's a hydraulic bearing. So basically it's a slave cylinder with a bearing. And what we did at McLeod is we said, okay, we got to make this better, because this is just annoying, and it's going to make it, it's just something that it just created a lot of problems for us. So putting this bearing inside, it eliminated that noise. It actually helped the release rate itself and soften the pedal effort even more. So it created a nicer system, and it connects right to the factory lines. So you don't have to pull all this other stuff off. It's not a big thing. So if you're doing a clutch job anyway, this is the perfect time to get rid of all those moving components that are inside the bell housing. And we're putting a bigger bearing on it, so that actually helps reduce the bearing speed itself on the clutch. So bearing life is actually increased on the bearing itself.
So you're describing this as a problem that's kind of inherent within the Jeep JK, yeah. that bearing wears out. Describe the issue and what people can listen for.
So the first generation of the JK, the 07 to 11, Jeep actually did a recall. There's a TSB on it, and what they ended up doing was putting a washer on the pivot point, trying to create more tension so that the bearing was riding up against the diaphragm of the clutch more, it's basically loading it. And that was unloading the clutch itself, so that bearing couldn't rattle. And the noise is just, I can't duplicate it, making the noise, but it's just and inside of that bell housing, obviously that's a big megaphone, being aluminum bell housing. So that noise is really loud. And mine was extremely loud. We'd go wheeling a lot. And, sometimes you run into an obstacle or something, so you leave the Jeep running, and all of a sudden you hear this. You're like, what is that noise? It's my Jeep. But as soon as I go in and depress the clutch just a little bit, obviously that noise went away, but you could hear it, 50 yards away from it. It was that loud. So when we designed this new internal bearing, that got rid of all the little moving pieces. So all the tension that was needed to keep that bearing up against there, we're already doing with one component, and that's the bearing itself. So the bearing has a little spring inside of it, and it keeps that bearing flush against the diaphragm fingers at all time. So there's no other moving parts other than when you push the clutch, the bearing goes out, releases the clutch, and it comes back, and that's it.
And this is something that even a JK owner that isn't necessarily taking their Jeep off road might find, correct?
Yeah, and yes. So it doesn't matter either if you got an aftermarket clutch or an OE clutch, they're going to sooner or later start making noise, and it's just something that happens, and it's just because they were built and designed. It's the same throwout bearing that's been used for years in the Jeep. So that's not the actual problem. Everyone associates it's the bearing. What's actually not the bearing that's creating the problem. It's everything holding the bearing in the bell housing that's creating the problem. So
is this problem largely been eliminated on the next gen, the Gladiators, and it's the JL?
No. So the new JL and JT, well, they went to a plastic bearing. Okay. So the earlier bearings were a cast iron bearing with, and the bearing was actually pressed on that cast iron collar. With the earlier Jeeps, the collar that the bearing slid on is just tin. And that's why the other thing that makes the noise, the earlier Jeeps had a big cast iron piece. So it really muffled that noise. The JL and JT, well, that's now a fully plastic bearing. And it's just two little clips on it that hold it in, and it kind of just presses in, and these little clips clip in. And what happens with those is the clips break over a period of time because it's just plastic. And as you push the fork, it goes through an arc, so that the tension on those little plastic clips, they end up breaking. And now that bearing sits there and does this on the fork, so it makes noise as well. So we're in development for the new JL as well.
Interesting. And can we dovetail off that? I know when I cut that intro that we talked a little bit about how McLeod is certainly well known in racing circles.
Sure.
You alluded to the fact that you're getting more into the off-roading scene, correct?
We have clutches for all the markets out there, whether it be an autocross, off-road, daily street, heavy street, your muscle car market. We have everything. It's not just drag racing. We're doing it all. Yeah. We developed this new adventure series line, which is, it is for the off-road enthusiast. So regardless of what you have, whether it be a Toyota, Jeep, Dodge, Chevy, Ford, whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. Anybody that wants to go out there and have fun with their four-wheel drive vehicle, well, we've got an adventure series clutch just for that.
Is that going to be strictly clutches, or it's too early to tell in development?
No, so here's the thing with McLeod. We also own FTI Performance, which is the automatic side of the fence. And then we just brought out to the family Silver Sports transmissions. So now we have manual transmissions to go in there. So anyone that wants to put a swap, any type of manual transmission swap, well, now we have everything to do that job. So yeah, it's not just clutches. It's clutches, transmissions, all the hydraulics. We're doing that, making all the hydraulic components right there in house. So it's a nice piece.
And it's exciting because it seems like a lot of companies are there's a lot more focus being placed on off-road. You said you're a Jeeper. You already know that the off-road is kind of that market is expanding, and there's a lot of people. Just look at the highways. How many Jeep Wranglers and stuff do you see on the roads nowadays?
Well, I live up here in Prescott, Arizona. So for us, especially with the pandemic, COVID hit, a lot of things got shut down. All the autocross events, and race events, you couldn't do that anymore. One thing they didn't shut down was going outdoors. So that's why that market just blew up in the last few years, because one thing you still could do is go outdoors and enjoy life just a little bit. And that's what we wanted to develop, was a clutch to help you on your adventure. And that's why we call it the Adventure Series. Getting out there and just having fun in your vehicle and seeing what kind of adventure you can get into, and sometimes what kind of trouble you can get into. But but it was so fun. If you look at the RV, the SUV, any type of Jeep, Toyota, those sales went through the roof because people no longer could go to Disneyland, Hawaii, or wherever else, any type of European vacation. But what they could do is take their family, rent a motorhome, or go somewhere and rent a Jeep or side by side and go out and have a good time. That's one thing they could do. And I think that's why that market blew up.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good perspective. Is there anything else you want to tell us? What's new in the McLeod world?
Well, we are working on a full line of clutches for the enthusiasts, off-road enthusiasts. So look for some heavier flywheels, which really help the off-roader. So that's like in my Jeep, we're running a heavy flywheel. We're going to call it the Mass flywheel. So we're just doing some little fun names with some of these components, but it's also effective. So whatever parts we're designing and putting in there, they're effective. They do the job that we want them to do. So anything we can design and put in that vehicle and make that vehicle perform that much better off-road or even on-road, then we're doing our job and we're doing it right. And we look at Jeeps, I have them myself. They're not a fast vehicle by any stretch of the imagination. But the Jeep performance is off-road. So you get it on a trail. And when we're designing our Mass flywheel, which is just a heavy flywheel, that Jeep will now work so much easier and allows the driver to enjoy being off-road and that adventure and just having a good time and letting the Jeep do what it wants to do. So he's not having to operate and use the clutch so much and having that extra mass. What it does is it makes the Jeep feel a little bit lighter. Okay, so now you got all that mass spinning on the back of the crank itself. So the weight of the vehicle doesn't pull the engine down as easily. But that also works on the street. So if you're cruising at 55 miles an hour, the weight of the vehicle, the big tires are really, the engine's working really hard to maintain that speed. So when we have this extra energy on the back of the engine spinning, well, now the engine's not working as hard to just maintain that speed. So now we can increase actually mile per gallon. I picked up about 1.5 miles per gallon when I put my flywheel in my Jeep, believe it or not, just cruising.
Interesting.
But then I let the clutch out, off-roading on a rocky situation. I no longer have to push that clutch as much because I can just let the Jeep work. And I can almost 2-foot it. I can still apply brake and throttle at the same time, much like an automatic. So the Jeep works the way I want it to work, and it makes four-wheeling so much easier and more enjoyable.
That's really interesting. You brought it up earlier. How did you earn the nickname Mr. Clutch? Not the sidebar, but you've got the decal and everything. I'm fascinated here. How'd that come about?
That came back, and that was with my previous days with another employer, that we were working with an agency, and we would go to different accounts, and I would talk clutches and stuff like that, and they would just be, man, we haven't been able to stump you yet. And it was just, I've been in the clutch business for 35 years. So I've learned a thing or two about clutches, but that's where that name came, Mr. Clutch, and they said, well, that's what we're going to start calling you. And then they bought me a Nike, when Nike came out with the Mr. Clutch shirt. So I had one of those times at SEMA, and the name just started to grow and grow. And then there was an event, we were doing an autocross event, and Ashton Robinson was the one who designed my photo, this one right here. And we were at an event, and I said, hey, because our clutch is hidden, you can't see it, right? So it's either you need to put our decal on the car, or I said, I was joking, or you're going to have to put my face on the car, And so she took that and said, well, I'm going to steal your Facebook profile picture. And she made that decal, and they put it on the car. And in that one event that we went to, she sold $600 of decals, believe it or not. And I'm like, wow, that was something. And it just blew up from there.
That's amazing. That's cool. Like the superhero origin story.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you want to, this is your whole open forum. Is there anything else you want to tell the folks out there watching about, McLeod or the clutch tech that you're working on?
Well, I was just say, pay attention to what we're doing, because we, obviously we got a full line of clutches we're going after. Obviously, McLeod's been, as you mentioned, very well known in the drag race arena. But I want people to know that we're coming after the off-road market as well. I mean, we've got a lot of experience. There's a lot of good guys in all three companies that have a lot of knowledge in the off-road. So we're taking all of our knowledge and we're put together, and we're going to design this adventure series for every vehicle out there: Suzuki Samurais, Toyota Tacomas, the Jeeps, the whole full range of Jeeps. And we already offer a bunch of clutches for the the domestic type Chevy, Ford, and Dodge. So we're just going to take all those, refine them a little bit, and we're going to have a full line of off-road components for that enthusiast out there.
That's really cool. So the McLeod R&D machine has been running at full tilt.
Yep.
Will, thank you for the inside scoop on what's new with McLeod. I know a lot of folks out there watching, a lot of the off-roaders specifically are interested to see, like what you said, what is coming down the pipe. And if you're out there watching, make sure to subscribe to the Summit Racing YouTube channel for updates on the other upcoming videos from this year's Performance Parts Expo, along with all the plenty more vehicle features, tech tips, and enthusiast interviews, all from Summit Racing. Until next time, we've been talking with Will Baty from McLeod Racing. Will, thank you so much. That's a wrap for today's Performance Parts Expo video interview from Summit Racing.